Well, I just thought I'd step outside the office, get a little bit of sunshine, get a little bit of fresh air before we go back in and do some editing. But we're just going to have a quick look at the news, quick news roundup. I'm going to open here with the EU and the China tariffs. I have to say, I just have no idea whatsoever what the EU is up to, particularly the EU Commission. Let me just give you a bit of background to this. The EU has decided that they can't compete with cheap Chinese cars. Well, that's a big surprise to start with. The European legacy auto, this is the Citroens, the Stellantis, the Renaults, the Mercedes, the Audis, they've all long since had a policy of we've got to sell these EVs at a really high price. We don't want them to cut into our existing business, so we need to boost them up, make them a little bit more attractive, but sell them at silly prices. So you end up with things like the current Renault 5, which is really quite a small car. Currently, the only model available is 33,000 euros, which is a clearly ludicrous price. And we've got the Fiat 500. Well, they've just discontinued that one because nobody was buying it. But the base model was about 27,000 for anything half decent if you don't take the tiniest battery they offer. So they were not really serious about offering the customers any sensible prices. Background, by the way, if you can hear the noise, I'll leave a little bit of it in, it's the sea. They've decided that the best way to do this is the European Commission, the best way to do this is simply to put tariffs on the Chinese cars. And these are tariffs that go up to 30, nearly 40%, depending on who they are. And so what that would do, that would put up the price of Chinese imports coming into the EU by 20, 30, 40%, which would make them a lot more competitive. So the EU proposed to China, well, if you don't want to do that, put on a minimum price, and that'll be all right. And so the Chinese have just come back with their offer, which is, okay, we will sell at a minimum price of 30,000 euros. And what that means is, as long as you can undercut us, you're going to beat us. If you're above us, then that's fair game. And the EU Commission, this is Ursula von der Leyen, has now said, no, that's not acceptable. We don't want you earning 30,000 euros for every car that you sell. That's giving you an unfair advantage. What we want is for China to stop giving you subsidies back in China. And I'm just thinking, there's two things on this. One I'm going to come to in a minute. But the first one is, what right has Ursula von der Leyen, the Commissioner of the EU, got to tell any other country, in this case China, how they actually run their business, how they run their finances and their economy, and what subsidies they do or don't give to them? She has no right. She's a tiny blip in comparison to the Chinese industry in terms of size, numbers, and everything. So this is just crazy. This is just power grabbing, in my opinion. She's got no chance of doing that. She's got no chance of China saying, oh, okay, well, let's change all of our government plans, all of our business plans, all of our economic strategies, and let's fall in line with Ursula von der Leyen, and let's stop giving subsidies to the EV factories and the EV battery manufacturers. Really simple. Yeah, never going to happen. So the first thing is she's asking something which is impossible. But the backstory to this is that none of the EU countries actually wanted this, really. Out of however many countries there are, about 28, 30, 10 countries voted for it, 12 countries abstained. That is, they didn't agree with it, but they didn't disagree strongly enough to want to ban it. And I think it was 8 actually actively voted against it. One of those included Germany, which obviously is the home to Mercedes and BMW, and both of those stood up publicly and said, if you put tariffs on Chinese cars, they will put tariffs not only on our cars that we already sell to them, destroying our industry in Germany, but they're also going to do other things. And of course they have. The first one of those is brandy, cognac. There's now, I think, 100% tariff on cognac, which goes into China. So totally self-destructive. Tariffs don't work. However, this particular one is just a stupid one. But what really got me going on this one was a simple statement I saw in the press. And it actually said, Stellantis have just agreed a $146 million subsidy to build a factory in Spain. And, gets worse, that brings subsidies this year up to 300 million euros, direct subsidies to Stellantis. Now, can anyone explain to me how Europe paying Stellantis to build factories, giving them loads and loads of money, is any different to China giving their factories loans or subsidies or grants or whatever they like? This is just absolute blatant hypocrisy. That, yeah, you can't do what we're doing, you've got to do what we tell you you're going to do. And you're going to change your entire economic business model so that it suits us, or suits Ursula von der Leyen, should I say. Most of the legacy auto just didn't want this at all. They actively campaigned against it. And another dozen just said, no, we're not going to vote for it. We're not going to vote against you, but we don't want it. So this is just going nowhere at the moment. Ursula von der Leyen is obviously pushing for this. She's the big boss, showing what big feet she's got, whatever. And she's not going to get anywhere. In the meantime, it's thrown the industry into chaos because they don't know what's happening. Chinese are still putting in cars which are cheaper. Chinese and the Europeans are also working a number of joint ventures, particularly Stellantis, who are working with Leap Motors, and there's a factory opening up in Poland. And that factory, although it's a Chinese factory, although it's going to be assembling Chinese cars, they make them in China, they break them down into components, put them in boxes, ship them to Poland, Serbia, wherever it is, it's Eastern Europe, and then they reassemble them there, and then they sell them as if they were European cars, and they attract no tariff. And I'm wondering, how does that one work? Because that is actually a Chinese car. Anyway, the whole thing is falling apart. And we've got one woman at the top, Ursula von der Leyen, who's saying, no, I'm right, I know the way forward, I know what we need as an industry. And the whole of Europe telling her, no, I think you've actually got this one wrong. So we'll have to see where this one goes, but it's not looking good. The one thing it does, which they don't need, is uncertainty. So that's what they have at the moment. Nobody knows what's happening. Can this factory in Poland actually make these things without tariffs? Because if she's going to put tariffs on them, that just destroys that factory. Why would they make them in a factory in Poland from bits they've made in China when they could just import in China and pay the tariff in the first place? So it's just an absolute shambles. It's all falling apart, and I don't know where it's going to go. It's got to fall apart. This cannot continue. So what we're going to look at now is have a quick look at Toyota. And Toyota is another one of those fascinating ones who say a lot of good things. For example, for the last 10 years, they've been saying there are solid-state batteries on the way. They've got their own patented Divine, which is the best in the world, that's going to destroy all petrol cars, all current EVs, Tesla and everything. Yeah, okay, well, if it was that good 10 years ago, and it hasn't come to market yet. In fact, they only have the one car, as far as I know, which is the BZ-X4, which is not the best car that they've ever made. Anyway, let's give them a bit of credit for actually producing one. But they're currently on two things which seem to be conflicting. The first of those is the technical director has come out and said the whole of the motor industry, not just Toyota, this is the whole of the world industry, has got to be having a combined effort to tackle the global carbon emissions. Now, we're not talking about petrol and everything else, ice and everything else. What we're talking about is global carbon emissions. They have to come down. I don't care who you are, I don't care if you like your V8s and the roaring engines. they are polluting the atmosphere, and the amount of pollution going into the atmosphere is getting to, if it hasn't already got there, getting to very worrying levels. It's starting to kill us, simple as that. So they've accepted, the technical director has accepted that they have to do something about global carbon emissions. So we're all in agreement. That's the whole thing behind EVs. Everyone's saying that government's trying to force us into EVs. No, they're not. What the government's trying to do is stop or cut down the amount of global emissions. That's the mission. It's nothing more sinister than that. It's not some coup. It's not some Elon Musk subsidy to get it. It's none of that. Each country throughout the whole of the world, but particularly we're dealing here with the UK and Europe, we have very, very scary levels of pollutants, of toxic chemicals, of fumes, of carcinogenic gases that are released into our atmosphere every single day. And there is nobody can dispute that. Nobody. Now, EVs might not be the answer. That's absolutely fine. I don't particularly say everyone has to have an EV. What we have to do, and I've said this right from the very beginning, what we have to do is cut out the exhaust emissions from the cars we have on the road. That's the mission. It's as simple as that. Elon Musk has gone one further and said we need to have a renewable energy source for all our transportation, and that's a step beyond where I am. I would just like at this stage for everyone to stop polluting the atmosphere and killing us, killing my children, my grandchildren, and one day hopefully my great-grandchildren. It's got out of hand. And so Toyota now has joined the choir, and they've said, yeah, we've got to cut these global emissions down. It's a major problem. We have to get the global emissions down. And that's one of the reasons China, for example, is on a big rampage. It's one of the reasons in America they've introduced the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is all about green energy, renewable energy and everything else. In Europe, we've got the 2035 target, or UK 2030, possibly somewhere around there. We got the Paris Agreement. There's a load of stuff going on all over the world, and its whole mission is to cut down the amount of global carbon emissions, the amount of pollution that come out of our forms of transport. And Toyota, they've come up with a totally different one. Well, it's the same one for them. It's different to everyone else. And they still think hydrogen is the answer. And hydrogen actually is an answer. I don't have a problem with hydrogen. It doesn't work. It's not economically viable in any way. But if they want to do it, absolutely fine. Here in the UK, we've just got rid of all of our hydrogen filling stations. I think we're down to about 6 left. Shell just sold all of theirs end of last year, early this year. So around the world, people are just abandoning hydrogen. However, if they want to go with hydrogen, that's absolutely fine, because at the car, there are no emissions. If you actually put it through a hydrogen fuel cell, the only emission you get is water. It's as simple as that. So I'm all for them. I really don't think they'll work. The hydrogen fuel cells, they have a very limited life, far less than the batteries on an EV, and they have to be replaced, and they are hugely expensive. As people who got one of the early Toyota Mirais, I think it was, those are already falling apart, and the cost of replacing them is actually more than the cost of a new car, replacing the hydrogen fuel cell. So it's a bit of a mess, but if they can come up with a way of producing hydrogen, let's say they have so much energy that it's just going spare and they don't mind all the waste, absolutely fine. Produce your green hydrogen, use that in cars. I would support that. The danger we have, and this is always a danger, is that the quickest, easiest and cheapest way of producing hydrogen is from natural gas, methane. Methane is hydrogen, carbon and oxygen. That's all it is. And so what you end up with is, if ever they get hydrogen accepted for green hydrogen for future transport, you guarantee that the oil industry will come in and say, well, we can make the hydrogen cheaper for you. It's actually, well, we don't call it green, it's blue. We will offset the carbon that we produce in making it with various mechanisms, should we say. So you end up with, once again, the oil and gas industry will just take over. We'll end up with as many pollutants, as many emissions, as many gases, as many chemicals going into the atmosphere as we ever had, or in fact possibly more. And so that's not actually an answer ultimately. It is good to see, though, that Toyota are coming round and saying, yeah, okay, we want to go after hydrogen. Well, we realise we have to stop ICE cars. That's the big one. We have to find the next step forward. They don't think it's BEVs, battery electric vehicles. That's fine. Find something else. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as at the car there's no pollution. Now, one of the old arguments was that if you put batteries in, charge them up, you're just transferring the pollution from the car to the national grid, to the power stations. And of course, we just released a video a couple of days ago, and that one showed that the last coal-fired power station in the UK has now closed down. Everything's shut down. There is no coal left whatsoever in the UK. Looking at the price of energy, electricity in particular, PV panels and battery storage is now cheaper than gas-fired power stations. So what we'll see is a steady transition from coal through gas, right the way through to it'll be solar panels, it'll be wind turbines, and they will feed into big grid-connected storage batteries, and that's going to be our grid for the future. And that's just a natural transition, but the really nice thing about it is if you've got 10, 20 million cars on the road, and each one of those is polluting a little bit, trying to get them to change is a nightmare. If every single car on the road is not producing any global emissions, carbon emissions, but they are using electricity, which does, it's very easy for the government to then just go to the grid and say to them, that power station, next year it must produce 10% less, the year after 10% less, and you must keep on reducing the amount of global emissions until by 2035 your power station is producing zero emissions. It's a really simple thing to do, and at a certain point, whatever it is, in this case gas turbines, but at a certain point those gas turbines will be coming up for renewal or major service overhaul, and someone will work out actually it's cheaper to just scrap it and put in a whole pile of solar panels, put in a whole pile of wind turbines, onshore, offshore, and then put some batteries in, and let's just transform the grid. So if you can get it away from individual cars and get the issue onto the big producers, the electricity companies, the oil companies, the gas companies, much easier to tackle them and just force them to do the right thing. So that's where we're going. We've got to see where Toyota ends up. I know BMW have just announced they also want to try and do a hydrogen car as well. And I suspect there will be some market for them. I was having a bit of a chat in the comments section with someone in Australia. And they were saying, yeah, we got thousands of miles between towns and you can't use EVs effectively. Well, that's not quite true, because I've seen recently someone's just done a journey round the outside of Australia in an EV and they got round successfully. Maybe not as fast as they could have done. But the answer might be hydrogen for long distances and battery for short distances. I don't know. We just have to get away from burning stuff, burning carbon and releasing that into the atmosphere. We've done more than enough already. We've got to stop doing it.